The sun beat down on the arid land of Midian, but Moses, tending his father-in-law Jethro's flocks, barely noticed. He had spent decades in exile, the memory of his Egyptian life a distant, half-forgotten dream. Then, near the holy mountain of Horeb, he saw it, a bush that burned with furious, incandescent flames, yet was not consumed. Drawn by the impossible sight, he approached, only to hear a voice from the heart of the fire, a voice that spoke his name with the authority of the universe. "Moses, Moses." The voice commanded him to remove his sandals, for the ground was holy. It introduced itself as the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and declared a mission that turned Moses' knees to water, return to Egypt and demand the release of his people from the brutal hand of Pharaoh. Moses pleaded with doubt, his tongue heavy with excuses. How could he, a fugitive shepherd, stand before the world's most powerful ruler? To silence his fears, the voice offered proof. His wooden staff, tossed onto the ground, writhed and instantly transformed into a terrifying serpent. When he snatched it up by the tail, it became wood again. Then, his hand, plunged into his cloak, emerged leprous, white as snow, only to be healed moments later. Armed with these three signs and accompanied by his eloquent brother, Aaron, Moses set his face toward the Nile Delta, the place of his birth and the seat of his people's enslavement. The era of silent endurance was over. The confrontation in Pharaoh's palace was not the triumph Moses had hoped for. Pharaoh, arrogant and dismissive, sneered at the concept of a God he did not know and mocked their request for a few days of worship. Not only did he refuse, but he intensified the Hebrews' burden, forcing them to gather their own straw while maintaining the same quota of bricks. The whips cracked harder, the wails of the suffering rose, and Moses found himself the target of his own people's despair. Yet, God met his dejection with a solemn promise, revealing his sacred, unutterable name, Yahweh, and affirming the covenant made with their ancestors. The stage was now set for a battle not between two men, but between the God of the covenant and the entire pantheon of Egypt. The war began on the banks of the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. As the sun glittered on the water, Aaron stretched out his staff, and the river instantaneously curdled. The blue waters turned a horrifying, thick blood red, a visible wound across the land. The fish died, the air grew foul with decay, and the Egyptians could not drink. For 7 days, Pharaoh watched his priests fail to undo the calamity, yet his resolve remained unbroken. The water receded, but his heart did not. Then came the frogs. At God's command, the Nile vomited forth teeming, slimy masses of amphibians that surged across the land. They covered every field, invaded every home, leaped into the ovens, and occupied the royal beds, a constant, disgusting presence that suffocated the sense of order and cleanliness that defined Egypt. Pharaoh begged for relief, promising freedom, but the instant the frogs died and were swept into nauseating piles, his promise dissolved. The next 2 plagues required no staff, only a command, proving God's control was absolute. First, the very dust of the land, when struck, transformed into clouds of gnats or lice, so numerous and tiny that they attacked every man and animals, burrowing and biting without end. Then, following the irritation of the gnats, came the swarms of aggressive flies, which filled the homes and ruined the land. Yet, an impossible line was drawn. The swarms stopped abruptly at the borders of Goshen, the district where the Israelites lived. This clear distinction was God's challenge, demonstrating that he separated his people from their oppressors. Pharaoh's refusal brought about judgments of ruin and pain. The first target was Egypt's wealth. A devastating pestilence struck the stables and pastures, killing the horses, oxen, and sheep of the Egyptians in massive numbers. Yet, once more, not one animal of the Israelites died. Next, Moses and Aaron took soot from a kiln and threw it into the air, causing agonizing boils to erupt upon every Egyptians and animals so severe that the royal magicians could not even stand before Moses. The plagues were now personal, scarring the body and destroying the economy. With the 7th wonder, the heavens themselves declared war. As Moses stretched his hand to the sky, a tempest broke forth, a combination of crashing thunder, blinding lightning, and hail the size of stones. Fire mixed with the icy deluge, shattering trees and killing everything exposed in the fields, but the hail stopped dead at the border of Goshen. The eighth plague was one of ultimate consumption. A ferocious east wind brought an unimaginably dense swarm of locusts that darkened the sky and descended to consume every last leaf, fruit, and blade of grass the hail had left behind, leaving the entire kingdom utterly barren. The final warning before the ultimate judgment was a descent into primal chaos, the 3-day darkness. A thick, oppressive, tangible shadow settled over Egypt, so deep that no one could see another, and no one dared to move. It was a suffocating psychological terror, a direct blow to the sun god, Ra. Yet, in the homes of the Hebrews, there was light. When Pharaoh emerged from the gloom, his heart was a stone block. Moses declared the final, terrifying judgment, the death of the firstborn. On that night of terror, the Israelites obeyed. They sacrificed a lamb, marking their doorposts with its blood, the sign for the destroying angel to pass over. At midnight, a dreadful cry ripped across Egypt. The angel of death struck every firstborn son, from the heir of Pharaoh on his throne to the child of the prisoner in the dungeon, and the firstborn of every animals. The great royal household was shattered, the Egyptian people were broken. Pharaoh finally capitulated in the depths of his despair. He screamed for Moses and Aaron to take their people, their flocks, and everything they owned, and go. They left in haste, 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, carrying the unleavened dough of their departure and the bones of Joseph, as they had promised. Pillars of cloud by day and fire by night guided their path, a constant, visible manifestation of the divine presence leading them toward freedom. But no sooner were they gone than Pharaoh's arrogance resurfaced. He gathered 600 elite chariots and his entire army and thundered after them, intent on dragging the slaves back to bondage. The Israelites found themselves trapped, the vast, unforgiving waters of the Red Sea before them, the dust cloud of Pharaoh's relentless army closing in behind. Panic seized the people, who cried out, accusing Moses of bringing them to the wilderness to die. But Moses, standing resolute before the crashing waves, lifted his staff toward the sea. The cloud of God shifted from the front of the camp to the rear, standing sentinel between the two armies. Then, a tremendous east wind began to blow, dividing the waters. The towering walls of water parted, and the seabed appeared, dry and firm. The entire host of Israel walked through the very heart of the sea to the opposite shore. As the last Israelite stepped onto dry land, the Egyptians charged headlong into the miraculous breach. But their heavy chariots bogged down in the wet ground, and they realized too late that they fought against a power far greater than their own. Moses raised his hand once more. With a deafening roar, the watery walls collapsed, swallowing the chariots, the horses, and the entire army of Pharaoh. Not a single Egyptian survived the cataclysm. Standing on the shore, watching the morning light glint on the returning waves, the children of Israel were truly delivered. Moses and the people lifted their voices in a magnificent song, an anthem of praise celebrating the absolute triumph of their God who had cast the horse and the rider into the sea. The age of slavery was finished, the journey to freedom had begun. If this video sparked something in you, kindly like, subscribe and share. By doing so, you are shedding light on a history long forgotten by many. God bless.